All right, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us and escaping from social media for the next 45 minutes to join us today on our weekly discovery session. For those that don't know me, I'm Natalie Irwin, Director of Stakeholder Engagement here at Efficiency Canada. So welcome to another Friday discovery session. For those that are new, we ask you to save your questions to the end. Alex, our presenter today, is going to present for approximately 20 minutes, and then we're going to open the floor for Q&A/discussion period. I know Alex has a question for all of you joining us today. And we have a pretty hard stop at 12:45 Eastern time, so that allows you enough time to finish your lunch or breakfast or maybe dinner, depending on where you are in Canada or the rest of the world. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Alex Hosselet, Marketing and Communications Manager at Electricity Human Resources Canada, he's going to share some findings from their latest research, Generation Impact, which collected the opinions and attitudes of over 1,500 Canadians aged 18 to 36 towards careers in electricity and energy. And I had a sneak preview of some of these findings, and I was actually quite surprised at what some of the kids had to say these days. So I know this is going to be a great presentation. I'm excited to hear what Alex has to say about this. So thanks for joining us today, Alex.
Thanks so much for having me, Natalie. And without further ado, I'll go through the research because there's a lot of interesting findings that we can go through. So this is a report that we just launched at the beginning of the summer. And I think everyone here is going to find it relevant. And I'm looking forward to the questions that they have. So as Natalie said, my name is Alex Hosselet. I'm the Marketing Communications Manager at Electricity Human Resources Canada. If you're unfamiliar with our organization, we are at a high level a national nonprofit that serves the needs of the electricity sector, specifically in human resources, based in Ottawa, but we have staff across the country. A huge amount of the work that we do is conducting research, where we look broadly at the sector of larger trends, demographics, workforce projections, and then deeper dives into specific areas, Generation Impact being an example of that. We use that to identify gap areas, and from there we develop different kinds of resources that serve the needs of the electricity sector at a high level or at a small level. And we do this by working really closely with all of the stakeholders in the sector. So working with people in industry on like the generation, transmission, distribution sides, working with educators, largely post-secondary education across the country at all levels, government, federally, provincially, locally, and advocacy groups like Efficiency Canada as well. But one of the things that we do is we bring everyone to the table to make sure that we have a 360-degree view of the work that we're doing. So I'll give some background about why we undertook this research. So we know from our ongoing research work and labor market intelligence program that we have a good understanding of the demographics of the electricity sector. We know already that the sector skews much older. Currently, just under 5% of the workforce is under 25 years old, which is much lower than what would be standard for most other sectors. Part of this is because much of the work, especially technical work, requires a lot of lead time for education and certification. But that's not the only reason. We just know that in general, the sector does struggle to attract youth for a number of reasons, which we'll go through more in this report. Part of the sector skewing older also means that we have a much higher rate of workers that we're losing to retirement. Over the period of the most recent LMI up until about 2022, we project that the sector is going to need more than 20,000 people to be hired into it. And 86% of this is going to be due to retirements. Only 14% is related to actual expansion demand, which is a really substantial amount of people that need to be hired to replace older workers. What's more is we know that the future of energy in terms of things like efficiency, electrification, digitization requires new cutting edge skills. While upskilling and reskilling your workforce is important, new grads often have experience in the newest areas of innovation. Additionally, if you spent any time at electricity conferences, you can look across the room and see that it's not only older, but also very male and very white. This is something that many organizations, both employers and advocacy groups, are working on changing. But hiring more diverse talent is also an essential part of what the sector needs to be equitable and innovative. So with all of this in mind, We conducted research in what became Generation Impact Future Workforce Perspectives. This research was done concurrent with the pandemic starting, but we think that the views in this represent a pre or post-pandemic outlook, as it was completed around the time when we sort of assumed, maybe naively at the time, that it was going to be over shortly. We conducted public opinion research with 1,500 Canadians between the ages of 18 to 36 from all parts of the country. So it's a good cross section of millennials and Gen Z who make up the current younger workers and those entering the workforce. We explored their attitudes about a number of sectors with a deep dive into subsectors in energy. It's important to know not how they feel just about energy, but also how it compares to other sectors. And this was done in part with support from Canada's Sectoral Initiatives Program and thanks to partners at the AESO, Electra, Skills Canada, and the Society of United Professionals. So to start, let's look at what we learned about what youth are looking for in careers in general. The findings were a bit surprising to us, and it might mean you have to reevaluate some of your expectations. So despite the stereotypes, top of the list was not free lattes at work, an office slide, or even being work that is exclusively values driven. Like previous generations, what young people are looking for is more tangible. Competitive pay, stable jobs, the ability to maintain a life outside of work. Doing work that is interesting and meaningful, along with having flexible scheduling, is also a priority. And yes, aligning with values is also important, but it's much more of a nice to have than essential. As a sector that, generally speaking, pays well, is stable, has regular hours, and contributes to societal good, electricity and energy more broadly is well positioned to actually attract youth. The question is, do youth know what the sector has to offer? And that's what we're going to be exploring more shortly. When asked about what young people want in their jobs, the answers were varied and often split. However, there were some responses that were heavily favored in certain areas. Clearly, working for an established business with job security and a pension is much more important. This is a very pragmatic outlook and something that many employers can provide. Likewise, youth lean towards working for someone instead of being self-employed. There are many large organizations you can work for in electricity, but it's also very feasible to work as an independent contractor. Again, the sector certainly meets these needs. Work activities were very split, but there's a slight preference for work that is somewhat active, doesn't require much travel, and is mostly indoors. And once again, this is something that the sector can certainly offer to young workers. So now that we have a sense of what young people want from their careers, how does that correlate to the perceptions of different sectors? The first thing to note about these responses is that this is simply perceptions of industries and not necessarily the desire to work in them. So this is really an outlook of how people feel about work being done in this area or views on these economic sectors very broadly. Here we can see that young people think about electricity compared to some other related sectors. From this list, mining and oil and gas have some of the most negative perceptions. Electricity generally favors a more positive view, but the largest response was actually neutral towards it. Renewable energy enjoys one of the most positive perceptions. I don't think that this chart is going to be very surprising to anyone. It correlates with a lot of what media coverage would reinforce, and probably many of the conversations those of us have had when we talk to others about what working in energy is like. However, when we do a deeper dive, we can see some more interesting trends come through. Again, I don't think this is going to be a huge surprise. Coal and natural gas as fossil fuels have some of the least favorable perceptions from our respondent group. Nuclear is fairly divided, but a large section of youth have a negative view of it. Microgeneration, which is maybe an inside baseball term, was generally favorable, but the most unknown area. Wind, solar, and other renewable energy sources like hydro, tidal, geothermal have extremely favorable views. Personally, I would like to meet the 1% to 2% of people with very negative views on renewable energy and ask them what it was like growing up in an oil tycoon family, but that wasn't one of our research objectives. While efficiency wasn't a subsector option, it's safe to assume that, like with renewable energy, most young people would have a very favorable outlook towards it. And more good news, the majority of energy generation in Canada comes from renewable hydropower. So for anyone that understands our energy mix, they should be excited. Now we get to the question though, do people understand our energy mix? We provided several statements about Canada's electricity sector and asked respondents to share how much they agree with them. While most agreed that a strong and sustainable sector is crucial, respondents were less sure about our sector, that our sector is a leader and how jobs will be impacted. While this looks fairly positive, I do have a somewhat cynical view on how much respondents understand. Only 45% of respondents said that they are sure that a strong and sustainable electricity grid is crucial for our economy. 45% somewhat agreed, and 10% disagreed. So less than half of young people understand that electricity is foundational to all other sectors. Clearly, there needs to be some more awareness done on this front. So now that we have a sense of what young people want in their careers, as well as how they view the electricity sector, we can bring these together and more deeply explore what they think about working in electricity. The first thing I want to note in these statements is that on across each one, about 1/4 of respondents don't know. The research was anonymous and independent. There was no pressure to put a correct answer on this question. And yet about 25% of people had absolutely no guess at all as to how the sector was for different dimensions of employment. I have a theory about the non-understanding of electricity. We've designed it to be out of sight and out of mind. Wires are either run well above our heads or underground when outside. Wiring inside is completely hidden behind walls or switches. We don't want people to be at risk, and we don't want them to worry. In fact, I would say that most people don't even think about their electricity until their power goes out. While we don't intend our work to be secret, it's often very hard to see and frequently hard to understand for a layperson. But back to the findings in this report. From those who did feel like they knew, there was more certainty that the sector is probably high paying and with good pensions. This is great news, since we already know this was at the top of what most young people want from their careers. There was much less certainty about the safety and diversity of the sector, and this is all understandable. We're all taught from a very young age that electricity can be very dangerous, and we must be very careful with it. Accidents do happen, although I would say that they are far less frequent than people would think. Our sector is committed to always being safety first, and it shows as soon as you spend any time working in electricity. In terms of thinking if people like respondents are in the sector, this is a fair criticism. As we've already noted, the sector skews older and much more male. For a young person, especially a young woman, it's very understandable that they might not see many people like themselves. If we consider the kinds of people working in electricity that most are exposed to, it falls into a few narrow categories. Power line technicians that you see working outside, technicians from local distributors that might show up to your house or neighborhood when there's an outage, or the CEOs that show up in the news when people are unhappy about their electricity bills. All of these positions skew male, and most of them skew older. Next, we use the extremely precise research method of asking, if you started working in electricity, which emoji would best reflect how your friends and family would react? I assume that NASA scientists use a similar approach when recruiting astronauts. In all seriousness, this was an easy and shorthand way of understanding how they think the sector would be viewed by their peers. At a high level, if we compare the family reactions to friend reactions, family would be generally more pleased with the news. As this follows all sectors and not just electricity, we can extrapolate from this. My family would be very happy for me if I shared that I just got news about any job at all. After the generally happy reaction, a neutral reaction is the next most popular. This is followed by an uncertain reaction and then a mix of both very positive and very negative reactions. It's important to understand this, as we know that many people choose career paths based on what would be accepted by their friends and family. While electricity is not the poorest performing sector on this list, there's clearly a lot of room for improvement, especially with friends. Once again, I interpret this as illustrating a need for more awareness about our electricity sector and the career opportunities available within it. This was one of the most illuminating pieces of the research, in my opinion, how different groups would consider a job in electricity. Overall, a modest 13% would definitely consider a career, and 36% may consider a career. Just under half of all respondents would possibly work in electricity, which is lower than I would have anticipated. We have a lot of work to do to change minds on this. When we look at different intersections of identity, this becomes much more pressing. Young men are much more likely to consider a career in electricity than young women. Men are 66% interested, whereas women are only 33% interested. If we note the statistic at the beginning, women make up only 26% of the sector. So if we were able to completely level the playing field and ensure a welcoming and equitable hiring approach for all applicants, we would still only see a small increase in female participation in the workforce, and that's a big problem. There is some good news, however. Racialized and foreign-born Canadians are more interested in working in electricity, which can help move the needle in that area of diversity. What I find most optimistic about this whole report is that an overwhelming majority of Indigenous Canadians are interested in working in electricity. At 68%, they are the most interested demographic group. While they only make up 5% of the workforce now, this is a massive talent acquisition opportunity. What's more, as we work to more centralized and small-scale energy systems, the opportunities for remote Indigenous communities to develop their own energy solutions is tremendous. This is a very positive sign for the future of Canada's energy sector. So now that we have a better sense of what young people currently think about working in electricity, we have to see how we can make improvements. We tested messaging against their views, and the results are very encouraging. If you'll recall the point I made about young people, and all people really, not having a strong understanding of our electricity sector, this can really drive the point home. We shared a number of true statements with respondents and asked how it changed their impressions of the sector. The great news is that the statements very rarely fostered a more negative view. It's more of a question of what messaging was the best. The messaging that had the best impact is the following. Canada has the cleanest electricity grids in the world and the largest carbon-free grid in the world. The electricity sector is innovating and is providing opportunities for individuals and businesses, such as the ability to produce renewable energy and sell it back to the grid. The rise of electric vehicles will add new demands to the electricity grid in Canada and require significant investment in research and development, including battery storage and solutions for used batteries. This will create a new aspect to the electricity industry and require new skill sets in the industry. 2/3 of these statements are simple facts about where our sector is now and the trajectory it is on. It doesn't require a lot of complicated explanations or technical understanding. For about 60% of the respondents, these improved their view of the sector as a whole. Between 30 to 35% weren't affected by it, and only 5% had their opinions soured by these statements. Messaging around innovation had a slightly lower, but still extremely substantial impact. These include the statements that you see on the screen. Overall, they had an improvement rate of about 55%, a neutral rate of about 40%, and a negative rate of about 5%. It's also worth noting once again that talk about smart grids and microgeneration is a topic that many respondents don't have an opinion on, most likely because they don't understand what it means. You'll forgive the way it's categorized here because it was put into a different block, but messaging around electricity working to fight climate change was extremely impactful. 70% of respondents had an improved view, only 25% were indifferent, and 5% negatively about that. Again, I would love to meet the 5% of nihilists responding to this survey. Messaging about changing technology helped, but it was not very impactful. At about 35 to 50%, only about 35 to 50% of people were impacted by this messaging. Nearly 50% were neutral, and then a slightly higher percentage of those had more negative views than the previous statements. So this is not a home run in the same way that the other statements were. So hopefully we all have a better understanding of what young people want and think. There are some really clear opportunities ahead that I think we can all work with now to better attract them to our organizations. Young people mostly don't know what working in energy is like or the opportunities it offers. I think we all have to start with awareness, both of what jobs are involved, how the energy sector works, what Canada's energy mix is. The news is actually really positive and it absolutely correlates to what they want to hear. Storytelling, therefore, becomes essential. Most young people don't know how great our sector is or the innovation it requires, the kinds of opportunities that exist now and that are coming in the future. We do need to emphasize what they want, which again, at the highest level was competitive pay, job security, work-life balance, and interesting work. This is something that I do think we can offer very competitively with other sectors. We just have to be able to make sure that it's coming across clearly in how we position our employment opportunities. Some of the most underrepresented groups, including Indigenous, racialized, and newcomer Canadians, are the most interested. This is a huge hiring opportunity in terms of being able to diversify our industries, to work more locally with the communities to better reflect the clients that we serve with this work. And it is something that we should all be very mindful of when we're looking at sort of our talent acquisition and making sure that we are welcoming all people to apply. And lastly, more work has to be done to attract women as a sector and at each organization. This is something that we all have a responsibility to do, not just to make sure that our talent acquisition is fair and equitable and is targeting women, but also to make sure that the environments that we're providing for working in are supportive and are welcoming so that we can hire women and that they're also able to stay in the sector. Efficiency wasn't a subsector in our survey, but I'm confident that it would correspond to the positive outlook on renewable energy. Youth are interested in being part of energy transition, fighting climate change, and using technology for good. Efficiency is extremely important for that. Young people bring cutting-edge skills and new perspectives. They can help you innovate. The demands of the future are going to be more complicated than where we're at now, and you're going to need people that have a lead on the newest technology and are forward-thinking and creative that are able to help you accomplish your goals. Energy efficiency requires more than technical knowledge, which broadens the pool of applicants as you can access. As we all know, there's a tremendous amount of work to be done in advocacy, in policy changing, in communications, even in the administration of a lot of this work. So it's more than hiring, the smartest electrical engineer grads that are coming out. You also need all the different supporting roles, and efficiency has a lot of opportunities to hire in that area. With that, I would like to bring the actual presentation to a close and thank you for your time and interest today. A question that I'd like to put to you to start is to ask, what are you doing to attract top talent from the next generation of workers? And I'll leave some links up here if you're curious to download the report because it is freely available on our website, and you're welcome to reach out to me with any follow-up questions as well too.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Alex. That was great. People want to answer Alex's question in the chat. Feel free to go ahead. I know there are some questions. So just a reminder, there are two ways for people to ask questions. One is you can raise your hand on Zoom and I can unmute you and you can ask your own question. The second way is that you can type your question in the Q&A box at the bottom, and essentially I'm going to narrate it for you and Alex will answer it. So let's get started. Oh, just before I get started, the only rule that we have is no sales pitches, of course. So, and no statements disguised as questions, or questions disguised as statements rather. So let's see. And we have a question here actually from Andy Cockburn. So he says, great presentation, Alex. What's going to be the most effective bridge from engagement to employment based on your research?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think that there's a few different pieces that we have to work on. Like I said, I think awareness is the biggest piece, and everyone working in the energy sector has a responsibility to do this. I think we need to go from trying to be out of sight, out of mind, to actually tooting our horns a little bit more. And when you think about the number of large electricity companies that are like more provincially owned, that maybe don't have an incentive to market themselves as aggressively, you can see where some of the gaps fall short compared to other sectors. To be fair, I'm a marketer, and when you have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. So I do think it starts with the communication. Engagement at school is also really important. We actually hosted an event recently where we had about 450 different students from all areas across the country tune in, and we brought on a mix of executives and young people to talk about their careers, their career paths. We made sure to have people that had really non-traditional career paths, really non-technical career paths. I think this is another really big opportunity as well. When we think about hiring young people, it has to be more than the technical positions. We want to be getting the best administrators. We want to be getting the best accountants. We want to be getting the best graphic designers. It sounds silly, but when you're going through these sort of education streams, working in electricity is not top of mind. If I could go back and instead of working in startups and working in agencies and go right to working for my local distributor, I gladly would have done that. It's a much more stable, better playing, happy employer. So think part of it has to be better awareness about energy, and the other part of it has to be more broad recruitment efforts that think holistically about what energy needs to succeed.
I think that's very, very important to note. As they always say, like attracts like. So if you're going to get the best accountants and best marketers, the best program staff, best feet on the ground are going to follow as well. So that's a good tip for everyone. Question here from Nick is, sorry, he doesn't have a question. He said, no specific question, but I wanted to thank you for taking on this important research. And thanks for sharing. He's going to take a look at the report and share it with his HR team. So just on that, actually, just a reminder to everyone, we are actually recording today's session, and it's going to be up on our website under the education tab. We keep all our discovery sessions that have happened in the archives there. So this one will be there as well, because I know a lot of people, I could see my emails coming in as Alex was presenting saying, can you please share the slides? So just so everyone knows, we'll do better than that. We're going to share the recording with you. So a question here from Chantal is, I know a young person who has a vision disability, in brackets color, who is discouraged from entering the electrical field. What are your recommendations? Which branch in the field would you recommend to such a person?
For sure. This is another interesting challenge. I didn't have it in one of my statistics, but one of the other areas that the sector really needs to improve in is hiring people with disabilities. Less than 5% of our current workforce has disabilities. And I think a lot of people assume that, electricity is only a super complex, super physically challenging job. Look at the power line technicians that have to climb up there and work dangerously. That's not the case. The vast majority of the work being done, I think, should be open to people of all levels of ability. And we obviously have legislation in place to mandate that we are providing fair and equal opportunities for that. So I can see where there could be some sort of challenges depending on what you're looking for in an electrical field. Obviously, a lot of wires are color coded, so that could be sort of a barrier for it. This is a reminder basically to challenge our sector to do better and to never set anything up so that someone that has, let's say, a visual acuity problem like color blindness can't do that. There's a lot of other ways to approach this with different things like texture, marking, things like that. I think on the whole, the organization has to move to standards that are more welcoming to do that. In terms of the opportunities for where this comes up, I think that this person does have lots of other opportunities in electrical work. There's a lot of other interesting work that isn't necessarily as color dependent, or could be done in sort of a more virtual environment where it's a systems planning instead of a hands-on sort of work, where they can bring their sort of electrical knowledge to doing things like working for grids. I mean, the evolution of smart grids coming is a massive electrical challenge that is not dependent on being able to see the colors of different wires. There are a lot of opportunities for that. And as this young person moves into their career and does this, I would encourage them to be a voice and to sort of talk about their journey into this, so that other people that are following in their steps can see that there is work, that it is possible, that the sector does have these opportunities for them.
I think that's great. I think it's important to see yourself as a champion and having role models out there. So if you can be a role model to people like you, definitely encourage people to do that. It can be as simple as like a LinkedIn post saying that this is my challenge that I overcame, and look where I am now. A question here, actually, we touched on this a little bit when we were discussing earlier, Alex, is from Julie, is how, was there anything in the report that surprised you out from your research?
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that are a major takeaway, I'm a millennial myself, just turned 35, so I'm on the very edge of what this research qualifies. So some of it was familiar to me. I think, I joked about how the perception of millennials is they want like office slides and they want these really non-traditional workplaces. That's never been the case for me. My goal has always been to have a good, stable job where I do work that I'm proud of. And I think that applies for a lot of my friends. So I know some of the members of my team were really surprised by that. You sort of take for granted when you work in energy how little people outside of the sector know. And the findings again and again showed that, there's just a real lack of awareness what's going on with this. There's so many interesting things happening right now with electrification, with things like smart grids. There's so much talk about hydrogen and SMRs. It's so interesting. But a lot of the times that kind of information doesn't penetrate further. And it's something that we have to demystify and bring that to a wider audience so people understand and can make informed decisions about their energy and about like the sort of democracy and politics and voting that happens around it. I think the thing that was the most exciting for me was seeing how interested young Indigenous Canadians were for working in the sector. We have a dearth of Indigenous Canadians working now, and we also have way less female representation. So in a way that, the women's lack of interest in the sector was unfortunate and disappointing, but not super surprising. But the tremendous interest and enthusiasm from Indigenous Canadians says that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, that if we can build the programs, if we can build the recruitment, if we can create the opportunities, we can really change the number for that. So
yeah, I think that's very encouraging to see. And I think to your point earlier, that it's not just people on power lines. There are a lot more jobs in the sector that if we show them, people would know that they're there. Next question here from Robert. So Robert, you're going to ask it yourself, so go ahead.
Hi again, Natalie, and thanks, Alex. I noticed that a lot of the information that you presented in your study related to supply side. As one of the firms that's working in efficiency, we're Prism Engineering in Vancouver. I'm just wondering whether or not you considered in your questioning whether you'd go beyond just asking about renewables and solar and talk about careers and opportunities in efficiency, given that we're speaking to the efficiency audience today.
That's a great and very fair question, and absolutely relevant to the talk that we have. We try to look really broadly at what the sector is. So we do look from like the large generators and distributors across the country, and trying to go down to like really great consulting engineering firms. Prism is an excellent example. You're very much on our radar for that as well too. There's such a wider range of that in that too. And when I get to have conversations with young people, if they're not excited about the idea of being the architect of a power grid, I say you can do freelancing, you can do on this side. There's so much work that you can do as sort of like an independent contractor or with a small group of people that suits the various needs with that. Those opportunities are really, really huge. As you know, it's sometimes easier to say like, here's Ontario Power Generation, here's TransAlta, these major companies as examples, whereas a lot of the smaller companies are more disaggregated. It's harder necessarily to find that sort of thing. But what I would recommend is making sure that as one of these smaller firms who is doing really essential work as a contractor on these projects, is to find opportunities to be able to talk about not just Prism itself and what your organization is doing, but about the need for this as well too. Because as much as there is need for people who oversee the day-to-day power grid operations, there's so much need for specialists that have to go in and do this kind of work. And as it gets more complicated and as it gets more technical and as we have all these new skills that come into it, organizations like Prism and small engineering firms are going to be on the cutting edge of doing that. We're already having talks with employers who are big and have massive teams in the thousands, but have to outsource a lot of their work because it's so specialized. And these are actually some of the most interesting and exciting opportunities for young people that are considering a career, especially on the more technical side of things.
Great, thanks for that answer, Alex. I have a question here from Susan are there any specific programs available for learning about smart grids and being able to apply learning to jobs, which positions, job titles there are, company names, any kind of tips you have?
Yeah, smart grids are really new technology. I think a lot of people are just sort of waking up to what the potential for that is. I have a lot of conversations where I explain how in the future we're all going to go from just electricity consumers to generators and possibly traders, and how the different demands throughout the day to night and storage options like really effective home storage batteries are going to be able to change that. It's really exciting. And when you get to have that 10-minute conversation with people in those rare instances, they get really jazzed about it. It's the kind of thing that I think a lot of youth would be really interested in. In terms of organizations that are leading in this work, Quest is one of our partners that we work really closely with, who is, I think, probably on the leading edge in terms of a lot of smart grid technology. They are all over the country. They have really great representation. For someone who is curious about this or looking for more opportunities, they're probably the first ones that I would go to talk about what is happening locally. There's a lot of really interesting small scale experiments that are being sort of scaled up as well too. It's a super exciting time for that. And I think if you look, you'll be able to find at least tests in pretty much every province in the country. And it is one of those fields where someone who is in school right now could plan to start building their career in it, I think about 5 years or so.
Very interesting. I think just a plug, it's not on smart grids, but on energy efficiency. We actually created an online resource. It's literally just a list with all training for energy efficiency that we were able to find. And if you see something on there that's not there, like let us know and we'll add it. But it encompasses training that's free training, online training, a lot of training that's done by universities or colleges, but also training that's done by some organizations or companies offer their own training that's just free for general use. So check it out. I think there's over 100 different training options on there, so definitely worthwhile. Just available on our website. A question here from Juliana is, she said she may have missed this in the presentation, but do you have a sense of how highly, quote unquote, making a difference on climate change ranks in use consideration and their
Yeah, so that was something when we asked about their interest in their issues that was rated very highly. It's in the Fuller report itself. Across all youth, it is a key issue. And with like Gen Z, with the ones that are, going through PSE right now, it is essential. It is one of the top issues of the day for them. There's a lot of, really outspoken sort of climate activists, Greta Thunberg and like other people across Canada and the rest of the world who make it their top issue. And I think this is a really great opportunity because Canada already is a leader in renewable energy. We have like one of the cleanest grids in the world. Efficiency is such an essential part of that as well too, because it's not just about being able to generate more electricity or having cleaner sources, but it's also being able to reduce the demand and increase the impact to make sure that we are doing something that is balancing with that. So if your work is in any way contributing to decarbonization, to energy efficiency, to renewable energy, that is absolutely a point that you should be leading with in any of your job positions. I would start with just saying, be part of an organization that is, making a difference in climate change, and you are immediately going to hook people a lot more.
Yeah, I think having a sense of purpose, like purpose-driven work, is something that a lot of the conversations that I have with youth that they're looking for. Well, pay is number one, which wasn't a surprise. Alex and I actually had a conversation about this because when you are younger, as you get older, you kind of forget what it's like to be younger and not have a lofty paycheck. That's a difference of $20,000 when you're at the higher end, the upper, say, $200,000 mark. That 20,000 isn't a lot, but when you're at the between 50 and 70,000, that's a big deal for a lot of people. That's a difference. That's a lifestyle change. As we're saying, having a roommate or being able to buy an electric car or visiting your family. So that is a big difference. But the purpose-driven work is definitely something that's really important and something that should be highlighted. I'm actually curious, Alex. I know electricity HR, especially your executive executive director, Michelle, is very engaged in gender equality and bringing women into the sector. Do you have any tips for anyone on how to reach out to women and how to get more women in the field of energy efficiency or electricity as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. And at the same breath, I also have to credit Efficiency Canada for being one of the first advocates to sign on to our Leadership Accord for Gender Diversity, which is one of the tools that we use. I think we're at a time in 2020 where people recognize that the sector should have more of an equality in terms of the gender balance here. I've never met anyone yet that says, no, it's got to stay a boys' club. I think even, when you have an all-male boardroom, they look around and they say, yeah, there's a problem here. So I think the intent is there. We have a few different resources that you can leverage to be able to use that. I maintain this isn't a sale pitch because they're free. So the Leadership Accord on Gender Diversity is one of those. If you're an organization that has a sizable amount of employees and you've said, we really do want to make a difference, we just don't know how. It's a framework that you can sign on to that has some really simple measurement and processes where you can sort of internally do your own measurement and set your own goals in terms of how you want to be able to change your organization. We check in with you over a 2-year period and make sure that you're able to continue to make progress. And then at the end, we sort of do a report and recognize how well you've been performing. If you're a smaller organization with less staff, but you have a big network, then signing on as an advocate in the same way that Efficiency Canada has done is great because we give you the tools to be able to talk about it and to go out and be a champion for gender diversity. In terms of actual resources, the one that I'm super proud of that we've launched very recently is an online toolkit called Illuminate Opportunity, which is a massive comprehensive suite of free resources that anyone from, can start from absolute scratch about learning diversity, equity, inclusion to being someone who oversees the diversity program at a large employer. There's so many great tools in it, so many different resources within it. It's also freely available on our website. And if you're thinking, okay, well, yeah, this is an issue I need to work on, it is a really great place to start from. And it is not going to just say this is important and you should do it, but it's actually going to show all the different tangible ways that you can measure this. Plus it has a look of gender diversity largely, but also the other intersections of identity that you might be missing out on within your organization.
There's a lot. Everyone has a long list of to-dos after,
yes.
after today's session. So we actually posted, my colleague Kristen and I, we did the GEM analysis of Efficiency Canada. So we took a look at ourselves and said, how can we improve? Because it's something, and so I always say, no shock, we aren't perfect, but we want to strive to be better. So it gave us a lot of tips on what we could be doing for how to do better. So we actually had a blog post on Monday, so I encourage you to go to our website just to check that out. One of the things that, which I think can be applied across the board is if you're always getting the same candidates and there's no diversity in your candidates, maybe you should reach out to different organizations to ensure that you're not just talking to the same people. While you all know I love everyone on this call, sometimes I need to step out of my comfort zone and go talk to people that I wouldn't talk to on a daily basis, to bring people into the fold. I think it's really important to have that diversity and equity if we truly want to. So any just a last minute thoughts or things you want to share, Alex?
Yeah, I will for sure say that, whether it's about sort of gender diversity or just trying to get a better sense of how many young people make up your organization. If you don't measure something, you'll never know if you're accomplishing it. If you don't set a direction, you'll never arrive anywhere. So making the plans and the commitments and going through the actions is a big thing to help with this. In addition to this report on the website, we do also have the event that I mentioned recently was also recorded where we had all those young people on, we had experts talking to them. So if you are looking at ways that you can be attracting that or the kinds of messaging, it's another really great resource to go through and get some examples. It's freely available on our website, and I'll follow up with Natalie with the links for the presentation, for the report, and for that event as well too. So if anyone has any follow-up questions, you're very welcome to reach out to me. My email is hosselet@electricityhr.ca, or Natalie can put you in touch with me. Yeah. We are here to help the whole sector, and that's what we do. So don't be a stranger.
Thanks so much, Alex, and thanks for the very insightful presentation today. I know I have a few takeaways for myself on that. So thanks to everyone for joining us today. A heads up that next week is actually everyone's favorite day of the year, which is the release of the 2020 Provincial Energy Efficiency Scorecard. So second year now. So on November 17th, so on Tuesday, very exciting happening. So I'm pleased to actually share that for the first time ever, we will be giving a presentation on the results, as well as give you an opportunity to ask questions to the creators of the scorecard. scorecard. And this is going to be happening right here during next week's discovery session. So 2 of my policy colleagues, James Getty and Brendan Haley, are going to join me for the discovery session and give a presentation and answer those tough questions I'm sure you're going to ask them. So I hope you can join us, and thanks again, Alex, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. Have a wonderful Friday, and I'll see you next week.